Welcome to the Cannabis 360 conference panel, HR challenges in the cannabis industry. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lale Vigash and I will be moderating the panel. And I am joined by Pari Nijati and Hilda Gan. How are you both feeling today?
Great.
Very
Fantastic. Good to hear. So, I've known Hilda and Perry for a long time, but why don't you? I mean, I wouldn't do justice if I introduce you. So, why don't we start by Hilda? Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Hilda Gann. I'm the President and Chief People Officer of People Bright Consulting. We are a full service HR consulting firm helping businesses build their businesses. And what I love to do is I love to work with people. I've been involved in the cannabis sector almost from the beginning when somebody said, "Hey, you're a nurse, you're an HR specialist. Do you want to talk about HR and cannabis in the workplace?" And that's how I've been involved and been able to speak at some of the conferences, grow the Grow Up conference and O Cannabis. So delighted to be here, Lale. Thank you for inviting Perry and I.
Oh, very welcome. It's happy to have you. And Perry, yourself?
Yes, so I'm Perry Najeti. I've also known these lovely ladies for a very long time. I began working predominantly in the cannabis industry a year before legalization. Just I saw there was a trend in the life sciences with a lot of executives shifting over to the cannabis sector. So dedicated quite a bit of resources to working closely with licensed producers, production facilities to address their recruitment needs. And it was an obvious decision to bring Hilda on board to support them on the HR task because the two do fit well together. And in the process of working in the cannabis industry, met Ms. Lale and had a great interaction with her. And here we are today talking about cannabis and HR.
Perfect. So, without further ado, let's get to the questions. I mean, many companies in the cannabis industries they're still in a startup mode, and some are thinking of starting up. So when a company is developing and it's in a startup mode, what are some of the key fundamentals you would suggest in terms of building strong HR foundation? This is something that I find usually neglected when a company is in a startup mode.
I think people are so geared towards starting up, they just start and they don't think. And to me, regardless of the size, even one person, need to think about the foundation. And that starts with your mission, vision, and values. What do you want your cannabis company to be? What do you see yourself doing 5 years from now? What will it look like? And what kind of culture do you want to create? Because from that mission, vision, and values, that becomes the foundation to build the operations, to build the clients that you want, and to, from my point of view, build the HR focus. So it starts with mission, vision, and values. And I would say start visualizing the culture. Because if you don't pay attention to the culture will define itself. So it's important to, from an HR foundation, once you do the mission, vision, and values, then look at creating foundation. You know, your policies and your procedures, your safety, the types of people you want to hire, and build from there. So it really starts with mission, vision, and values, then HR foundations that are reflective of mission, vision, and values. And I'm going to let Perry talk about the recruiting side too, because that's key.
Yeah, so one trend I saw at the very beginning of the cannabis industry emerging was they would hire C-suite, obviously, to get the company up and going. They always neglected chief human resources officer, and it was very counterintuitive, in my opinion, that you would wait to hire HR last. Although you're building a company, you need a strong formula in place. So one thing I pivoted very quickly in the industry is encourage startups to bring on strong HR leaders early on and not wait until the company was at employee number 6 or 10. It was much better if they had a strong human resources executive who became their business partner in the process. So that's the trend that I saw pivot very quickly because the original formula was not working, and bringing HR in sooner helped the company survive longer.
And I would think it depends, like when we say chief HR, it would depend on scale of growth. if you really think you're only going to be at a couple of people, like less than 10 people for 2 or 3 years,
Right.
then you should bring on an external HR consultant to do that, because it just doesn't seem cost effective to have somebody full time doing that. But definitely need somebody. I think where people think, they say, okay, we'll hire somebody HR. Let's get somebody 2, 3 years out of school and they'll do it. They have don't have the necessary experience to understand how to scale. They don't have experience of dealing with human resources through its many experiences. I've talked to some of my HR colleagues who've got 10 years in the business, and they haven't even had a termination. They've never dealt with an HR lawyer. There are things that they have not experienced. So to hire somebody who you think 2 to 3 years, I'll pay them $50,000, $60,000, they don't have that full life cycle, particularly in the cannabis industry where you are scaling up so rapidly. You've got this vision and it moves at the speed of light. It just moves at the speed of light. When we had our company, I was able to grow, but we grew 20% every year. That's different than growing 50% every quarter. You're just doubling. So
Well said. I think actually now many companies are facing what you just mentioned. They are now in high growth mode.
yeah.
I have many clients or many colleagues who are in that sort of spectrum. So, what would their strategy be? Now they're in a high growth mode. So, how do they ensure success?
If they have not developed their policies and procedures, they need to make sure they develop that foundation. So policies and procedures, safety, given the high compliance nature of the industry, they have to have the safety needs of the facility in spades, and that's where I think it's important to hire an expert in safety to do that with the foundations of the policies and procedures, the recruiting cycle. These things should be, where you bring on an HR expert. At some point, you're going to want to, as Perry said, bring on that chief human resources person. So if you haven't done it in a part-time capacity, you should be doing that, if not full-time. I think depending on how fast you are growing, when you're at about 50 employees, you got to make sure you have somebody on site full time. 100 definitely is when you should have somebody and a few other staff supporting you for recruiting and supporting you for the basic HR operations day-to-day stuff. But these are important decisions, and as Perry said, to make HR part of the team, because there are so many things, particularly as you're growing, so many decisions really need a voice of what is being experienced by the staff and what should be experienced by the staff, because you really want to make sure your recruitment and your retention of staff is important, because people don't realize how much they spend on their budget when people terminate and you have to replace them. And I'm going to let Perry talk more about the whole recruiting aspect of that.
Yeah, so what I've seen as well is that we scale up, we do successful hires, and because the foundation is not strong enough or the philosophy the founder had hasn't been able to be passed down through the different layers of the company, there's a huge disconnect. So what we want to try to prevent is, we're bringing on strong talent, how do you retain them? And typically the best solution that I've had experience with is bringing a very strong HR professional, and who is brought on to all the critical meetings, is fully aware of what the business is doing, so can advise on what the best next steps are. And typically it does require to view HR not just as policies and procedures, is how strong is this individual as a business partner for our company as we scale up.
Perfect. More than ever, I find employees want to work in a better workplace, somewhere that they really enjoy going to work. So they look at it more than a paycheck, something to pay the bills. So what would you suggest in terms of how to build a better workplace? How do you make your company an employer of choice, specifically in the cannabis industry? What are your suggestions?
I, it's important to develop a strong work culture. You know, COVID has really taught people about what they want. During this period where a lot of people were working remotely, they they wanted several things. They wanted to feel like they belong. You know, Lala, you're absolutely right. People want to feel like they belong. And the second thing they want to do is they want to feel like they're professionally challenged. And I don't mean stress challenged. I mean growth of my career, my capabilities, not being challenged at work, being stressed. And when those two happen, and when you have a great boss, that's a recipe for success. So that's the three reasons people leave. They leave because they don't feel challenged, they feel threatened, and uncomfortable with the relationship they have with their managers, and they just feel the work culture isn't there. So how do you reverse engineer that? How do you make that positive? You make that positive by creating a trusting environment where people feel valued and want to come to work. And then they feel challenged. And to me, a key critical aspect of that is a management team. So important that the management team not just know what they're doing. They're not just skilled at what they do. They manage the production well, but that they're people skills managers, that they know how to motivate, they know how to make staff feel good and belonging. And so these are important qualities that you want in your organization. Create a strong work culture, create managers who are skilled at their people skills. And that's what I think is important. Companies should invest in the training of their managers in their people management skills.
I guess also enforcing the culture as well. So if you've defined the culture to begin with, then you can basically build on that culture and make sure that you're hiring appropriate people.
If I
Now,
could just add, in today's day with diversity, equality, and inclusiveness, diversity is like people have diverse backgrounds, right? But
yes.
inclusion and equality, treating people the way they want to be treated, um, and including them is key. Inclusion doesn't necessarily need to cost a lot of money, but people need to create an atmosphere where people feel included. I think that's a key.
Yeah, and to go back on Lolly, if you want to be an employer of choice in the cannabis industry, you have to learn of some of the errors that previous industries have made and correct it as well, and don't replicate that. So if people, executives or individuals are coming from the pharma sector, listen to what were the headaches in the pharma sector and don't replicate that in the cannabis sector because you are bringing in quite a bit of talent from that life science space. So don't repeat it, and having a really strong conversation with the HR professional will help you have a pulse on that organization, create that environment these people want to be part of, because it is an exciting industry. It still is 5 years later. Everyone is still pumped about it. Don't take away that excitement by inserting these individuals in a poorly managed workplace, because that takes away from the whole project in the first place.
Into that, what changes you've seen? You mentioned, I mean, the industry is 5 years old, and it has, in some companies, I see it has matured faster than I anticipated. So, what changes have you seen as the industry matures? Like, what are the major big changes you've seen?
I think what's powerful is some founders of companies from 5 years back have stepped back and let other people do their task. That dropping of that ego and not running around saying, I'm the founder of A or B, has been very promising to see because there's a point where you can't do it all and you have to give the power or share that power with somebody else in the company who may not have been a founder in the first place. So I've seen that trend where strong companies step back the founders if they are no longer capable or in tune with what the next steps require. So that's been very interesting to see.
I think too, at the beginning, people who were founders had abilities that were okay for sustained slow growth to maybe 2025. But once it started getting to high gear and rapid growth, that's where you need the visionaries. That's where you need the C-suite experienced people to do that. And I think when I reflect back, and Perry was, trying to find master growers, and we were trying to find different people, those people that succeeded had a blend of experience, and in case of master growers, I mean, they're so specialized. But what needed to happen too was the fact that the industry is so regulated that you have to have people who understand and support compliance. You can't have the lawless society. Oh, I'll just add a dash of this and a and a smidgen of this, and if there's no quality control, there's no compliance. You do have to have people with some element of being able to follow protocol and to listen to protocol and not say, nuts to that, I march my own tune. So I think that's one of the things that I've seen is that key to success. And again, as much as it's a corporation, a growing business, and it needs the people who have the business-minded skill sets for those to succeed.
If I can add about the trends, one thing that happened the last few years is compensation became more balanced. I think it was very skewed at the very beginning. People can ask for whatever and they got it typically just because they were needed to come into these companies. But after 5 years, you know what talent is worth now. So a lot of founders could say, yeah, 5 years ago I would have paid you that, but that's not reality anymore. Or a company preparing to go public, they can't afford to pay specific ranges that they initially promised when they're privately held. So it became a little bit more about salary being more balanced. It's still fair. I think it's extremely fair in the cannabis sector, but now it's no longer skewed. You don't have outliers within company, the same guy making or girl doing the same task, making way different wages. And I think that's why HR has to be part of it, because they could give you that market awareness.
Yeah.
What is the market doing for these roles? Not just who that person is and what they're asking for. Is it fair compensation? And then you can push back and work with that.
Yeah.
Well said. That brings another question. And you guys actually touched base on it. Hilda touched base on it. I mean, for a smaller company who doesn't have a dedicated HR team, and these are like really, I mean, salaries and all on a small company actually makes a huge difference. So what are the resources or best practices that you guys recommend? If I'm starting up and I can't have a dedicated HR. So what are the strategies that you would recommend? How do you want me to start?
Do you want to go first? Do you want me
Yeah,
to go
I would
first?
say, well, as recruiters, we have to understand what the company plans to do in the first place to find the right talent. So having that open dialogue, being open to feedback, and understanding that we're giving you what the market is doing typically and what are the profiles of individuals we're coming across. So listening to that feedback is very critical. If you don't ever plan to be an employee of 50 people, you've always wanted to be small, and you're fine with that. Feedback is very critical. Understanding that finding the right profile needs time. It's not immediate. It can happen quick. Sometimes we get projects wrapped up 6 to 8 weeks, but that's not typical. So just being very open to what the industry is doing, what kind of talent you're looking for, and listening to feedback. And if we sense that there might be some issues and we recommend HR, there's a reason we're saying it, because the last thing you want to do is invest in recruitment and have full turnover or partial turnover. That is the worst case scenario for wanting to work with a recruitment agency.
I think a good formula is having that dialogue, as Perry says, with the senior team and figuring out what is the best strategy. It depends on how quickly they grow, how much they are growing, and what can happen. So one formula which I have used with some of my clients is really, I come in and I help them build that strategy. I make sure if they don't have their mission, vision, and values that they kind of articulate that, because it's really important to hire. Most people who are hired, if they stay, it's because their philosophy values align. It doesn't mean a perfect match, but they're similar to the company they're hired. So it's got to be important. Some people will say, I got a great office manager, bit of HR background. So if you want to have multi-purpose people, that's good. But have somebody who you hire as an expert. So I think that's a good combination. Sometimes what has happened is that companies will hire somebody with that 3 to 5 years experience because they can afford that, but then create a relationship with a senior external person like myself, for example, and that person then is that guide. You only call them when you need it, but it's a cost-effective example. You don't need somebody at $100,000 when things are running smoothly. Um, but you sure darn need them, maybe 3 or 4 times a year. So why not try to say, can I do with somebody who is like 3 to 5 years, is really, a crackerjack, knows what they're doing, but they just don't have enough experience. So they know enough to make that phone call and to ask at that opinion. So I think that's a really cost-effective, good example. And at some point, people will say, yes, it makes sense. There's a lot of people here, a lot of complexity. We need to hire somebody, and we should be hiring somebody at 10 to 15 years experience and paying for that expertise.
Perfect. So we can never get away from COVID questions, especially if you're an HR person. And I'm hoping this is an hopeful question post-COVID. There is a talk about, workplace, making workplace about employee experience. And that's really what I feel like right now in the market. People are looking for an experience in their workplace. So what is it? What is employee work experience, and why should a cannabis company care?
It's something that I've been sharing almost since day one of COVID. When COVID came, I thought, okay, there's nothing for me to do. I'm going to go, and hang up my shingles for a bit. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm HR. Every employer needs HR advice. So we started doing webinar series, and at that point, I said, look. Everybody thinks work culture, if it's toxic, you can't change it. I said, you can change it. You can change it now. You have that opportunity. And as COVID kept going on and on, I kept doing more and more webinars. And the latest ones in season 2, I've talked about employee experience. Employee experience is so critical. We know what customer experience is. We follow the customer and we try to make it a great experience. Think of that, but for employees. And what we're saying is that the employee now, with mass exodus, the great, termination, whatever you want to call it, so many coined phrases. But two things is those companies that did not make me as an employee feel connected, I don't feel a sense of belonging now. And I want to see what else is out there. So you're going to have people who are leaving because they just felt you didn't care. But the other thing is those people who felt they had a good thing going, they loved working for you, they missed working, in the offices, they've had a chance to think, what is it that I want in life? What is it that I'm good at? And what about balance? What is that? So you're going to have other people leaving because they decide that there's something passionately that they want to do now. So you're going to have this great mass exodus. And what the challenge is employers need to think about, what do we need to do to retain our staff? And I'll go back to the beginning. You create a trusting relationship. You look at inclusivity. You make people feel that what they're doing, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel like they're being challenged at growth, and they're feeling like there's a connectivity between colleagues, connectivity with their managers. I call it an us versus them difference, and a we. Companies that are where the culture is stressed, it's not a great place to work, there's this us versus them mentality. Oh, they want this. They want us to do that. But those companies that are really going to be best places to work, they're a we. We want to do this. We want to help build. And so that's another challenge, is to create a we mentality, create that employee experience.
Yeah, and as founders and CEOs of these smaller and mid-sized cannabis companies, typically, if they're founders, they've always been entrepreneurs. They never really had to scale up the way they did possibly in cannabis. So they weren't aware what an employee experience really meant. They were solopreneurs, whatever the case may be. So just shifting their mindset and being proactive that it is a middle of a pandemic. We're still not out of it, sadly. How do you create that safe environment, and how are you addressing sometimes the other side effects of the pandemic, which is the mental health issues? Who else better in a company can understand these issues than HR, right? As a founder, you may not have a pulse if the company's grown so large that you don't see your staff day to day, especially if they're not coming to the office. And if you're not at the facility walking around as a founder, you really don't know what's going on the ground level, other than what you may hear through hearsay. And that's not great. So typically having a strong HR that is well established within their staff, that have that resources and are proactive enough to know what's going on at the ground level, can be the year for the founder and give them guidance. Here's what we're experiencing. These are some proactive measures we could take today, because we don't want to be in an environment where any recruiter can call them and pull them out. So just making sure you understand what really is an employee experience. If A, you never had that before, or now that you do, have you done everything in a proactive manner to create the environment where people don't want to leave? They truly enjoy their workplace.
Thanks for sharing that, because that just made me think of something, Perry. A good HR team is one that has the trust of both the employee and the employer. You know, I think sometimes employers think that the HR person should side with them, and then the employee does not trust the HR. If you can create it where that person is the bridge, that person is the bridge between the staff and the employer, and both sides respect that and allow for that to happen, that's where you hear through the ground whether things are simmering or whether things are going well. So I'm encouraging everybody to allow that person in that role to be that bridge, to allow for that speak. If they're the we can, they can be part of that we and foster that we.
Well said. And lastly, I mean, this is on the news every day, every minute of the day. Issue of vaccination. I mean, it's big controversy right now, and I think we would like to avoid it and defer it to HR. So, just like any other tough, question. So, what should companies be doing with respect to the mandatory double vaccinations? What's your take on it?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll just add something briefly because Hilda can expand on this one. I do respect employers that, again, going back to creating a safe work environment, a safe employee experience, so that if employees are coming back to the labs, to the offices that have not already been up and running, and they're going back with the concept of returning to work, as an employee, you should feel safe to go back to your office. So I do side with the fact that I, as an employee, would love to go back and not worry about possibly catching something from my workplace and bringing it home to my family, to my children or elders that I may be interacting with. So I think the socially responsible thing is to have double vaccines. However, there's always exceptions. If it's just a political decision for you not to vaccinate, I am not for it. If it's a health issue or scientifically based reason why you're not vaccinating, I respect that. But then HR should, or the environment should create a situation where they're accommodating that and making sure people are aware that so and so may not be double vaccinated because of whatever the condition is, right? So if you're choosing not to do it because of political reasons, I do have a problem with that. I might get slack for this. But if it is based on science and truly a health concern, then absolutely, I think companies have a duty to accommodate if they need to. But I, as an employee, I would like to go to a safe work environment and not worry about the 8 hours that I'm sitting at my desk or in the lab. I'm not contracting something and bringing it home to my family.
Yeah, it's tough. I personally believe in the rights of the individual.
Right.
I believe in the rights of the individual until it affects the rights of society. And this pandemic has really impacted our societal safety and health. And so I'm inclined to also believe that we need to protect the rights of society over the rights of individual. So that's our personal take. As an HR professional, what I'll share is that I have been watching and seeing what others are doing, and these large companies and organizations now are saying mandatory. Now, having said that, mandatory has to also take into account that there's a duty to accommodate for medical reasons as well as the human rights concerns. So there's, as a business owner, you're always looking at your risks, right? Lale, you're a risk. You're a QA lady. You know that. You
Yeah.
need to look at your risk. So the risk is the safety, and we're in an industry where safety is paramount. The safety of your organization and its people versus the individual rights. So as a business owner, you're going to have to say, okay, I have a right for safety of my staff, and I have a right to make sure everything is the way I want to manage it, versus the right of the individual. So the fact that we're seeing mandatory is great. What's going to happen, the risk to the company, is that there will be people who may decide to challenge it, and there's a cost associated with that challenge. So you need to figure out your numbers and what to do. But I think you'll see now that the big companies, the City of Toronto and big organizations have said mandatory, then smaller organizations will say, okay, we're going to go to mandatory, and we understand that there may be some risk from that individual perspective.
And if I can add, cannabis falls under the life sciences umbrella. So as a life science company, whether you're ancillary creating vaping products or you're actually manufacturing and producing in a GMP facility, you're still a life sciences company. You should be based on some science. So respect the fact that that's what the umbrella company is. If we're just a whole bunch of accountants, no one touching a plant, no one dealing in the lab, then that's a different discussion. People can work remotely and you can accommodate that way. But again, knowing people having young families whose children under 12 are not vaccinated, they're not protected. I just think I'm going to get in so much trouble after this. It's a very selfish thing to do that, but it is a serious discussion to be had. If someone truly has an issue with getting vaccinated, try to understand what that is and accommodate. So then they don't have the ability or the need to challenge the company and potentially get into a legal mess with them. So yes, you have a human right not to do what the community is doing, but you should also not be in a position to harm others if you could potentially harm others. So.
Yeah,
This
tough
point that
question.
you can argue, both ways. It's really controversial. Right of person, right of control over your body, and the way these vaccines have come to the market and been pushed. So like I see it that way, but then at the same time, I agree with Perry and Hilda. I mean, it's sort of continues to be controversial, and you can argue it both ways. And I think the discussions will continue, and the science and the logic somehow will prevail at one point.
And there's that whole privacy thing. Do
Yeah.
you have the right to know whether I double vaccinated or not? I think that argument, I don't hear it quite as much anymore because the big companies and organizations have said, no, it's mandatory. That's it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, as a business owner, we run a college, and at the same time, someone who respects individual rights, it's a tough, a tough road to take. So we'll continue that conversation. I do have so many other questions to ask, and I mean that's typical of any HR panel, especially nowadays. For the past year and a half, HR has become way more important than, I mean, important, like just taking the center stage. But unfortunately, we're running out of time at this point. And I would like to thank you both, Perry and Hilda, for joining us today. And thank you all also for joining us today and listening to our conversation. And I hope to see everybody in the Q&A. And section that we have and ask the tough questions, right?
Yeah. And Lali, thank you for hosting this. This is a very important discussion for a lot of companies. There's nothing that we're talking about today that doesn't impact these organizations. So just wanted to give a shout out to you for doing this. This was a very important topic to address. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us. And
Thanks for
all the
having us.
best.
And
All right.
including this in the panel, because it really, this HR section, because it's so important for organizations.
Exactly.
Be safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Enjoy
Have a
it.
great day.
Bye.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.